What are SAP and ERP implementations really like? That is what we're going to talk about here in today's live discussion with one of our clients to discuss a client case study of an actual real life, in progress, in flight SAP ERP implementation. My name is 𝗓𝗃𝗃𝗁. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we're an independent tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And this is part of our transformation ground control podcast. And this is the live interview series that accompanies that podcast. So thanks for being here today. We've got a lot we're going to dive into here today. I'll introduce our guests in just a moment. But before I do, a couple quick logistical things. If you are wherever you're joining from today, welcome. We're streaming YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, X, and Twitch, TikTok, several different platforms we're streaming to today. So thank you for joining wherever you are. If you have questions, please feel free to chime in the chat with any questions or comments you have along the way. Any questions for our guest here today, who I'll introduce in just a moment. Before we jump in, though, I'd love to hear from the audience where you're joining from today. What city and country are you joining from today? I myself am in Miami, Florida, in the U.S. here today, and love to hear where you're all joining from today. And our topic today is inside a real life SAP implementation, and joining me is Justin Runner from 𝗓𝗃𝗃𝗰𝘁. So Justin, thanks for being here today.
It's a pleasure. Great to talk to you, Eric.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So before we jump in and dive into your current project and sort of the real life battle wounds and the good, bad, the ugly of everything going on with your project right now, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and what you do at 𝗓𝗃𝗃𝗰𝘁, if you don't mind.
Yeah, my name is Justin Runner. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here at 𝗓𝗃𝗃𝗰𝘁. I've been here just about 12 years. Prior to that, I spent the better part of close to 15 years in retail, manufacturing, and CPG. For our ERP initiative, I'm the executive sponsor. Really my first foray into SAP, but I have a lot of big project experience with a lot of different software companies and partners. So happy to share our experiences and my experience as well.
Great. Well, it's a interesting journey you've been on for sure. But tell us a little bit about, just to get started, how did this all get started, this S/4HANA journey that you're on right now? Tell us a little bit about how you guys got to where you are and what led you down the S/4HANA upgrade path.
Sure. So we started looking at really what's next and when back in 2018. 𝗓𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 had implemented 𝗚CC 6 prior to my arrival. And we just really didn't have a compelling business need at the time, but we want to avoid ever putting our company on the position of the proverbial green screen. So you always want to be looking for, what's next and how do you best support a growing enterprise like ours. At that time, we evaluated a handful of options and solutions, ultimately choosing to revisit the assessment and about every 2 to 3 years as appropriate. At that time, 𝗚CC 6 was fine. It met our needs currently and for the foreseeable future. Our business had kind of got over that initial hump of the implementation of it, how to use it, the good, bad, and the ugly, and had somewhat optimized their processes around it. And there really wasn't anything in the marketplace that we felt would be a dramatic improvement. I would say probably during the middle of the pandemic, we started to zero in on about a 2025-ish target to implement and start a new ERP upgrade. 2022, 2023, we did a deeper dive evaluation on the marketplace. We looked at your traditional monolithic ERPs, and we looked at best of breed solutions. I would tell you that we took a really eyes wide open approach, but at the end of the day, we felt like SAP was the best choice for a variety of reasons. Ultimately, there's no perfect solution. They all have their pros and cons, and you have to weigh, an entire tech stack, your degree of customization that you have today, software providers, investment strategies, short and long term. And also certainly worth noting is once you get to looking for ERP and back office solutions that can support a business with, 10 billion plus in revenue, the list gets very, very short in a hurry. So, for a variety of reasons, we really felt like SAP was the right solution for us going forward, not because it was incumbent, but because it best met our needs going forward.
Right. Did it help that you had that investment over the years in the legacy SAP tech stack? In other words, did that learning curve, did it help with the learning curve and just having some, even though it's a new product with S/4HANA, it's a different product than ECC. It's still SAP. It's got a similar look and feel in some ways. Did that help you guys?
Absolutely. As we've gone through or in the middle of, as you mentioned, our implementation, there's a lot of familiarity with a tremendous amount of the SAP functionality. Now, the finance module, as an example, tremendous amount of change, but given our staff and our familiarity with it, that certainly has helped us. But again, it was not the primary driver of why we selected it, but it's certainly been an unintended benefit.
Yeah. Yeah. We always tell clients like yourselves, if, whatever your incumbent is, especially if it's one of the bigger ones like SAP or even Oracle, Microsoft, if you've got these investments in the technology, you've got to consider that, because sometimes that does provide some additional learning curve benefits, and it allows you to leverage some of the investments you've made over the years, even though you're upgrading to a newer product. But sometimes that can help.
There certainly were a number of conversations we had it from less about the business familiarity and more about the tech stack. When you talk about the size of team required to support our current 𝗓𝗡𝗃 environment, it would have been a very big lift to move to something like Oracle as an example, but it would not, if we had thought that would have been a better answer, we would have went that route, but it was certainly a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. Well, I'd love to hear from the audience, just as we're getting into the conversation here, what you think the most important success factors are for an SAP or any general ERP implementation. We'd love to hear your feedback on that, or your thoughts on that. And we'll certainly ask you that question here in a few minutes, Justin. But before we get to some of the lessons, just as we set the context here for the project, I know that, in our discussions with you and in doing work with you in the Qiwit team in the past, you emphasized that this project isn't a digital transformation, and you focus more on a do no harm approach to your upgrade strategy. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you meant by that when you and I first started talking about that?
Yeah, because it catches a lot of people off guard when you mentioned something like that. So ultimately, we're doing this upgrade because we think it's the right thing to do for the health of our business long term and our growth goals. It's not based on a hard ROI calculation or capability enablement. We didn't get a business driver to justify this investment. I talked about, we started looking at this in 2018. I would have preferred if there had been some tremendous business gap and capability we could have enabled with the new ERP implementation. That didn't happen. That didn't materialize. But we do believe this is the right thing to do for our business. You and I have talked offline. The Qiwit business is actually humming along. So much of what you hear in the marketplace and continue to get pushed on is wholesale business transformation. That may be right for a lot of companies. It's not right for us. And so we're trying to mostly do this as a technical upgrade, almost like when I think about talking to our business customers, like preventative maintenance on a piece of heavy equipment. It's just the care and feeding required to make sure that we are best positioned. Again, never putting our company behind the 8 ball. We could have kicked the can down the road. We could have pushed this off, but there will become a point in time where you can't push it any further. And as I'm sure we'll talk here a little bit, SAP pushing customers in the end of support deadlines and things like that for a variety of reasons, now is the right time. When I think about do no harm, the term you used and we have used here extensively internally, it is at a micro level as it relates specifically to our downstream data. So our non-SAP systems and really the gymnastics we're currently going through to avoid business disruption. Again, we're humming along. We want to continue humming along. We want to get this thing implemented and allow our business to continue to do and engineer and build great things going forward, not be disrupted by back office total transformation. That's just not the goal. So, if I put a bow on it, we're not following the standard playbook or someone else's playbook. We feel like we've developed the right playbook for Qiwit at this point in time for our company. That's what do no harm and, technical upgrade. A lot of people would prefer to wave a flag and talk about total business transformation, and that's right for them. It is just not what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and we were talking right before we went live here today, and you made a comment that what's right for you guys may not be right for another organization, and vice versa. And I think that's a really important point, of self-awareness, and an important thing to point out, because a lot of times organizations think that I have to do a digital transformation because that's the buzzword. And we always hear about, myself included, I espouse a lot about how if you're not going to have an ROI, maybe you shouldn't do the project. But in your case, you're saying, hey, we're not doing this for those necessarily for those tangible hard dollars. We're doing it for other reasons. Here are the reasons why. And I think making sure that you're all on the same page with that, that's the important thing. It's not so much, is that the right answer or not? It's, are you all on the same page? And if you are, and you're managing the project accordingly, then that's really the key right there. And I think that gets overlooked a lot.
and it's something that we've had to orient all of our partners, including SAP, about, because they want to come in and talk about business transformation. And that's the popular buzzword. And again, for lots of companies, they need to transform their business. Kiewit's been around. I'm looking at a giant sign outside my window here since 1884. And we have been fortunate through great results and excellence of not needing to dramatically reinvent who we are. We exist and operate in many different verticals, and that works to our competitive advantage. But ultimately, the core of what our business has not changed since Peter Kiewit started this company. Doesn't mean that we aren't evolving. It doesn't mean that we are stuck in our ways. It just means the model as defined is operating at a very, very high level. And we want to continue to sustain it and build a foundation that it could continue to expand over the years ahead. It's a pretty simple formula of not needing to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. Very, very well said. I want to turn to the audience real quickly here today. Sanjay on LinkedIn says, good morning. Hello. Thanks for joining today, Sanjay. Sam Graham joining from Spain on LinkedIn. Thank you for being here. Pritam joining on LinkedIn. Thank you for joining. And Satish has an interesting comment to follow up your point, Justin. Satish says, do the tech upgrade and preventive maintenance. Very good analogy and approach. No real value comes from trying to do a business transformation / design thinking, etc., as it is putting the cart before the horse. So I think what Satish might be saying is that having the technology there enables you to do the business transformation or add value or
right.
Get that ROI you're looking for, but you have to get the technology in place in order to be able to do that, which is interesting. Good point. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, situationally, yes. For Kiewit right now, that's absolutely right. We're putting this foundation in place, and it'll allow us to tweak and adjust and adapt as we go forward. For other companies, they might be, again, backed in the corner, having to reinvent themselves, having to totally redefine their supply chain or their customer base or their product mix, whatever it might be in a different industry. In those cases, you really need to consider to document your as is, your desired to be in a more traditional way, if you will. But for what we're trying to do, least disruption to the business is our recipe for success.
And speaking of disruption to the business, you mentioned before we went live as well that today is take your kids to work day.
That's
and
right.
So if anyone hears just the ever so slight, faint sound of kids in the background, that's why. It's because you guys are having to take your kids to work day.
We're having to get creative from our labor force, but we have not yet dipped into the ranks of elementary and high school students. So,
well, I was just going to say, are you at least putting them to work? Are they able to help on the project while they're there?
I'll have to go out in the hallway and see what's going on after we wrap up. But it's a great thing. I mean, obviously, a lot of people tuning in today don't know much about Kiewit. Great family values. We do the right thing, getting our kids involved. And from a legacy perspective, you could see 2-3 generations. It's not unusual to walk through the hallway and see 2 or 3 generations of family members working in different capacities in different parts of this organization. So I'm all for people being able to bring their kids to work today on a nice summer day. So it's all good.
Yeah. Get them out of the house before going back to school here shortly.
That's right.
Good stuff. Well, hi from Pakistan is what Muhammad says on LinkedIn. Hello, Muhammad. And then kind of a follow-up. I assume this is a follow-up to your green screen comment, Justin. This is from Aditya. Text green game over. So I assume that it's referred.
I'm just old enough to talk about that. When I started out my career as a developer many years ago at Hallmark, I was a COBOL developer. So I still know the green screens and remember them fondly or not so much at times. But that kind of background and experience is ultimately culminated in being in a position to drive an initiative like this. So I do feel like, but I think most people here that understand the correlation of that green screen, it's not where companies want to be or need to be moving forward for sure.
What's crazy is how much of the workforce right now doesn't even know what in the world you're talking about when you say green screen.
So
what does that mean?
Maybe a brief detour. So my secret now, or maybe now won't be so secret plan, is in retirement to just be able to go support some of these businesses that cannot move off the mainframe, that cannot get off the green screens and charge some exorbitant per hourly rate to fix some of their solutions. So if you see me hanging out on the beach with a laptop in 10 years or so working on COBOL, I'm just taking care of my retirement. So It's hard. I mean, a lot of those industries are going to have a hell of a time getting off that stuff. It's it's unbelievable, but there's something to said about the reliability and the performance and how rock solid it is. I'm happy to not be in that environment, but I have many peers that are working for companies that are trying desperately to figure out how do we get off of it and know, kind of the mountain that's ahead of them, given the retiring workforce that understands it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and those RPG programmers are really hard to find. Some of the RPG and other mainframe focused people. So it's not a terrible idea. And a lot of companies are still using these really old systems, trying to move off of them.
That's right.
Hello to 𝗓𝗃𝗃𝗃 on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining today. See, Jason on LinkedIn says, Justin speaking reality and pragmatism. That's exactly why we wanted him on the show here today. So thanks for that comment there. John on LinkedIn says, great topic. Tuned in from Kenya. Is that what you mean? I'm not sure what Kenya is, but I assume you mean Kenya. Sanjay says, can I ask a question? Yes, please do. That's what we're here for. Any questions you have, feel free to add them here. Mohammed on LinkedIn says hello from Digitized Solutions in Minnesota. And then we have at least one person here, Satisha on LinkedIn, that can relate to the mainframe discussion. Mainframes, we had to submit claim expenses and a bunch of stuff till even 2000. It was right around Y2K when a lot of the mainframes seemed to go away as people prepared for the Y2K cutover.
Yeah.
Nicholas on LinkedIn calls it the good old days. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't know if that's a good old days.
Much simpler days.
Yeah, simpler. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Mohammed's from a small Oracle consulting firm. And then Darian on LinkedIn says, are there scenarios where more disruption might actually be necessary or even beneficial? Have you guys come across that at all in your discussions and in your transformation itself?
Yeah, some of this gets in our governance model, what we're going to take on. We also have a commitment that we've made to our executive sponsorship team about being what we've called opportunistic. So when we get into certain areas or functionality where it's an acceptable amount of risk, or we think the payoff is worth it at this time, we are entertaining some of those enhancements. There are some things we're doing in our finance space around billings, as an example, or our ledgers. We took a purist approach of drawing the line of pure technical upgrade, but with our executive sponsors' help in filtering out where's some real bang for the buck opportunities, we are taking some of those things on right now. There are other things like warehouse management is probably a good example. We're implementing the basic, I don't remember what the module is called, the warehouse management module they're implementing from SAP, but there's a standard and there's an advanced. We're going standard out of the box, but ultimately we will be able to extend that into advanced in the future, but not right now. So yes, there are opportunities for disruption, but again, it's a really fine line on how long you want these projects to go on, how many people, because if you really open up Pandora's box and said, what would you like us to do? The list would be endless. So we're trying to, time box it, contain it, produce a predictable outcome, get it across the finish line. Because the other thing you really have to, if you've been at this long enough to know, once you get these large systems in place, the carryover list of enhancements is sitting there staring you in the face. I would much prefer that the users use it as is for maybe it's 60 days or 90 days, because the list they will then come back to you with will change a lot. Oh, we know we asked for those 100 things, but really now that we've been in it for a while, for 3 months or whatever that appropriate time period is for you, you identify different use cases, higher opportunity for value. So that's how I think about it. We're not going to get too distracted with what people believe based on what they know today. Let's get it in, get them using the system, and then we'll adjust and make the enhancement list from that point, as opposed to sitting here right now.
So how do you navigate the hype? Not the hype. I don't know if that's the right word, but the sales incentives or the vendors kind of pushing, like SAP pushing you to use all these cool bells and whistles that you're not using. And I imagine that drives them crazy. Like, hey, you've got all these advanced functions that you're not even considering right now. You should really be thinking about that. Is that a pressure point for you guys, or how would you navigate it if it was?
Partners like SAP, Microsoft, and others that have worked for us long enough to know that they should provide awareness of what's out there and not push. We're aware of what's out there and what we believe the capabilities are and what the value proposition is for Kiewit, but ultimately it's about crawl, walk, run. You got to get your, the foundation right before you can start to layer some of these additional things on. Certainly in the case of SAP, they would love for us to be the flagship customer for Joule Talk and Copilot and all these other things. That's great, but there's so much low-hanging fruit about how I can materially drive value to the Kiewit business on the fundamentals, and then we will stair-step our way into those pragmatically. Because the other thing you really got to watch out for is maybe more so the really cheap entry point widgets and features and get people excited about it, and then you get the bill 3 years later when they realize the marketable value of some of those things. So just kind of always on the lookout for what will add value to Kiewit, but ultimately being very thoughtful and intentional about how we walk into it, because every year they've got something new to sell and something to upsell. And part of why we picked Rise, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit, is a bet on the future. We do think that SAP will ultimately get this right, that they'll build some great capabilities. But I would tell you that we always want to be in tune with what they're building and why, where we think the value proposition is. But very rarely do we need to be the beta testers for that stuff or to get too excited about it and it doesn't really have a return on investment. So try to be pragmatic about where we get into. But and thankfully, we've got some people in the business that get super excited about what they read on a press release or others, but they're also very logical and analytical. And we go back and talk about the reality versus the hype. And the word you use there is right. It's hype. I'm a big fan of the Gartner hype cycle, and I'm sure most people know what that is. And I want to see something established and stabilized before I get too excited about it. AI is another great thing. Everyone's pushing for AI. I think ultimately it's going to be a huge disruptor, but we as a company are trying to be very intentional and thoughtful about where could we get some real return on an investment there? Because you can have a ton of investment without a tremendous amount of return. But we work with our partners such as SAP, Microsoft, and others, pushing forward what Kiewit is going to do from an AI strategy, but not getting too far out over our skis and just throwing money away to chase a shiny object. We're trying to be very intentional because ultimately we do think there'll be a big return, but being very strategic and intentional about where and why we invest.
Yeah, and coming out of the Sapphire conference season here, with all the announcements around Joule and some of the agentic stuff they're doing, it's really cool stuff, but also being able to be clear-headed about it and not getting too excited. The crawl, walk, run, I think is a great analogy or a great way to put it, because the Joule stuff, all the AI enhancements they're making, a lot of the stuff SAP is doing is light years ahead of where most companies are. And that's okay. That's their job. And eventually companies will catch up to them. But in the meantime,
right.
Basics in place.
That's right. That's right.
Good way to put it. So John, it turns out, is joining from Kenya on LinkedIn. So we got that part yet. And then Nicholas was clarifying when he said good old days, he was referring to RPG. So that was a good point of clarification there. And then Anthony on LinkedIn has an interesting question. I'm going to change the question a little bit, if you don't mind, Anthony. I'm going to actually broaden this a little bit. But Anthony says, hi, tuning in from London. Great podcast. How many different suppliers were contracted with as part of the implementation? And maybe I'll just sort of elaborate on that question a little bit and just say, can you talk a little bit about how you chose your implementation partners and just what some of the lessons learned were there along the way?
Yeah, good question. Well, in terms of total partners, I'm going to say around a half dozen, and that gets a little squishy in terms of what's exactly in the ERP upgrade versus what we call parallel initiatives, but let's say 6 to 10 depending on the context. But as it relates to the core systems integrator for S4, I think we took the time to really understand our project requirements and what we needed from our partners. I've worked with several tier 1 partners and boutique firms throughout my career. They've all got their advantages and disadvantages. So trying to find that right mix. Ours, again, is mostly what you'd largely hear as a brownfield or a brownfield plus, a technical migration, not a business transformation. If we've been talking about wholesale business transformation, I would have been more inclined to go the tier 1 route. But the one thing I absolutely believe around tier 1 SIs is that if you don't manage them, they will manage you. If you don't have the people that have successfully worked with those kind of providers or partners in the past, you better hire some really good people that have successfully worked with them. When you think about that day one, whether it's, and they all do it, whether it's Accenture, Deloitte, PwC, when they land those first 100 or 200 people, you've lost control that you can never get back. The tier one SIs are not bad per se, but again, you have to effectively manage them. I've heard you reference getting Accenture in the past, and that's a term that, immediately clicks with, I know exactly what you're talking about. I think that we prioritize talent over the badge that they're wearing. So again, the Big Four example of the first 80 to 100 people that land on your project, there's usually 2 or 3 stars, and there's a lot of paying for junior staff on the job training. So what we were thinking about was trying to find a way to go get those 2 or 3 stars that had that kind of experience, that ideally would be able to hire from their own peer network, because at the top, the best people, they all know the other really good people because they've come across them in the last 20 or 30 years of their own careers. And so that was a lot of our strategical approach of why we went to a boutique, if you will, SI partner. There were risks if you think about it from in a startup perspective and the firm we went with, but ultimately I would tell you on the backside with the boutique firm and the one we picked in particular, I feel like Kiewit owns this initiative. It's not the partner owns this initiative. And I feel like we have true partners aligned to a common goal, which is our success. They aren't driven by billable hour rates or total revenue by the customer, regardless of how the project goes. Our success is their success. They need us as a referenceable customer moving forward, and we are heavily incentivized to ensure that we all get to the right thing. So I know you've talked about this throughout your career, but what doesn't sit with me very well is when you hear a company talk about, well, the SI led us down this path. That just doesn't fly with me. When I think about this tier one versus boutique conversation, a lot of CIOs will pick a tier one for a large ERP project because it's effectively, the de facto standard. When you pick an Accenture, no matter why that decision was made, it's almost viewed as defendable if a project goes sideways. And if they couldn't do it, well, who do we think we could be any better than what they were doing? I don't. That's a built-in excuse. If it goes sideways with a boutique firm, well, people such as myself get skewered over. Well, how could you pick somebody unproven and smaller? But ultimately, I felt like, and we as a leadership team felt like the collective upside and the risk was lower. I mean, it was the right pick, again, for us situationally. It doesn't mean it's right in all cases, but it's definitely played out to our advantage. We got over some early startup bumps, and as this thing has really gotten rolling and the teams have gelled and merged and fully staffed, and we did get the A talent we were looking for, it's been wildly successful for us. I couldn't say enough good things about the partner we picked and ultimately sticking with them and finding our rhythm and delivering it. It wasn't without pain and startup, but now we're humming along and much better for it.
Yeah. Well, and I don't want to be dismissive of the quality of the SI you chose, because it sounds like for sure the right partner. But I think the bigger advantage you guys have is what you said about ownership. You guys, whether it was this smaller boutique type of firm or whether it was a tier one SI, you guys clearly are in control. You have ownership of the project. So regardless, I think that's the key right there. And yet you want to find the right partner to help you. But the key is to what you said is you manage them. They're not managing you, and you're not letting the project get out of hand.
I think there were some leaders on our initiative that early on were looking for more from that SI, if you will, some of them came from companies like ConAgra and others that had experience working with big partners. And so those big firms bring the playbooks and they bring the experience, and they're driving everything, right? And this group didn't do that. We had to collaboratively work together to find those playbooks and run books and how we're going to operate. And ultimately it made us better for going through that process. Again, back to the point, hey, we got to own this, because good, bad, or indifferent, we're the ones that the executive team is going to look towards. And that partner ultimately goes away at the end, and it's ours. So I feel really good about where we're at. I had some intuition as to why to go that route. Some of those assumptions were true, and other factors have come along through the ride, but it was the right pick, but maybe for not all the reasons I thought initially.
Right. Yeah. Nicholas on LinkedIn agrees with you in your approach. He says small consulting firms tend to own the client's pain for sure, in my experience. So great feedback there. Nicholas also said he agrees with you 100%. And then Aditya says great insights. And here's a question from, actually, let me get to this question first, from Ginger on LinkedIn. Ginger says, what is your approach to engage business super users in a way that builds business true ownership and adoption that will survive and thrive post go live? And it sort of fits into this whole ownership theme, but now working our way down to, so far we've talked a lot about project governance, ownership of the project overall, but as we work our way down to the frontline employees, what has been your approach to get the masses engaged and involved and feeling like they own this project as well?
Yeah. Again, I'll keep using that word situational. So if we were greenfield, if we were starting from scratch, if we were going with Oracle or some other kind of thing that we didn't have a lot of familiarity with, what we would have done would have been co-location. We would have everybody working together, business and IT sitting side by side. In this case, more of a brownfield approach. I think we'll talk a little bit more about this, but we ended up standing up a sandbox early on. We got some business involvement right out of the gate with the system and really data that they were familiar with. But one of the things that we prioritized very early on, given that we weren't co-located, and we're pretty close in proximity, most of the core users of this back office system are in the same metro area, they're not in the same building. We wanted to ensure that there was appropriate buy-in. So we really prioritized organizational change management and communication to an extreme extent. Our advantage in this was, and I did not talk about this earlier, in 2023, we made $1 billion acquisition, and Kiewit's done acquisitions over more than 100 years, but of that size, scale, and magnitude was different for us. And so we spent the majority of 2023 acquiring that business, integrating them into our systems as opposed to just carrying on what they had. And so we started to build this big SAP muscle, if you will, for the first time since 𝗚CC was put in. Through that project, when we started our governance model and strategy, so we started to build that muscle. Organizational change management and communications, we over communicated because in that case, it was, 1,000 or more employees, new to Kiewit, spread all throughout North America. And so we built the communication, organizational change management muscle. That allowed us to seamlessly transition to this ERP upgrade. It's almost like you might have thought of Kiewit Technology Group as a bunch of 400-meter sprinters for the better part of a decade. All of a sudden, we had to train for and execute a marathon. We did that in 2023, and that also went into the timing of why now for the ERP upgrade. We'd finally learned how to run a marathon, and now we were getting ready to go run the biggest marathon, the Boston Marathon. It was just a logical continuation. But the business buy-in, we learned how to do that through the Weeks acquisition in this calendar year 2023, and we've been able to continue it. It's not rocket science, but it certainly requires expertise at the top, good leadership, constant communication. We do have regular touch points. We have almost every 2 weeks. We have pulse checks. We're doing constant surveys, getting feedback. We're making constant adjustments about, do you know what's coming or not? I will tell you, for the first half of 2024, there was a little bit more of the technology group behind the curtain, trying to figure out what we're doing and why, getting oriented and getting things set up. And then once we kind of pulled back the curtain and first exposed our business users to, hey, here's what's coming, then it's been, okay, we're all on board. And ultimately, as we found out, in many of the cases with the S4 system compared to 𝗚CC, there's not a tremendous amount of change. Once the business users saw their system, what their new system would be with the data they were familiar with, you got, oh, I know how to do this. We're good. Any of the fear and uncertainty and, oh my God, what's it going to do to us, has largely tamped down. And in those areas where there's dramatic change, finance module or equipment, a module we ran in the past is no longer available from SAP, so we're having to implement something different. We're going above and beyond just to ensure buy-in and engagement. I don't know there's a secret formula around business understanding and education, other than you just have to be intentional. You got to have a great team around organization and change management and communications and just execute on that. It's easy for that to slide to the background, but we prioritized it right up front. I think it's one of the things, Eric, that probably surprised maybe you a little bit in your and I first conversation, your team when they first landed, because most of the time OCM is overlooked or not prioritized enough. And I would tell you, if anything, we've overdone it because we do understand the value of it.
Yeah. Yeah. In which case, are you really overdoing it or over communicating it? It's probably may feel like it to you, but to the front lines, that's probably what they need.
And I'd rather err on the side of over communication than under. We just, nobody wants surprises, but especially not with your core customer base.
I'm still waiting to meet that CIO or team leader or executive sponsor that comes out of this. Maybe you'll be the first, but someone that comes out of this and says, you know what, we invested way too much time and money in change management. We should have throttled that back and done something different, but I have yet to meet that person.
I don't think so, but I think, and when we do surveys of our executive leaders and others that, are engaged, are aware, but not necessarily engaged on a daily or monthly basis, they've all been very complimentary, and nobody's surprised at what's going on, where we're at, where we're going. So I feel really good about that.
Yeah. Now, shifting gears somewhat abruptly from the human people change management side of things back to a technical topic here. This is from Dan on LinkedIn. Dan says, because it was a technical migration, did you clean the data from ECC first before loading into S4? If you didn't clean, then do you think it will affect your AI when you turn on some Joule functionality in the future?
Boy, there's the grenade dropped in the middle of it. So the hardest thing about our entire initiative has not been the core migration of ECC to S4. It has been about the data. We have not been fortunate enough or smart enough to invest on a really good underlying data strategy. So I'm going to take a little bit of a detour here and try to answer that question as we go. We are cleansing the data, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have the optimal data strategy that we're executing against. 𝗓𝗏 had allowed and essentially promoted a mindset around downstream data where the source system matched what was replicated to operational data stores or data warehouses, almost in a like-for-like perspective. For those of you with technical backgrounds, it's the virtual equivalent of hard coding. In a lot of cases, we didn't have a layer of abstraction sitting above it. So what that means is, as we've created, at the time we started this initiative, we had 6 different downstream data platforms. We have shrunk it to 3, but we have not necessarily solved the foundational challenge, the atomic level of data. We are cleansing the data in ECC. We will get it to S4. But as I push data to the downstream systems, we talked a little bit earlier about do no harm. Most of that was around our data platforms. We are having to manipulate S4 data to look like ECC data to allow everything downstream to continue to function as it does today. That was an intentional choice for a period of time. Once we get the ERP implemented, we will be able to come back and appropriately define a data strategy, a technical strategy to enable the data strategy, and I will be able to, quote, really clean data for the long term. Do I think it will materially impact what we could get out of AI? I can make it better over the long term. I believe within the SAP ecosystem, we'll be fine. You talk about Joule and some of its fine. But when I think about some of the other things we're doing beyond the SAP ecosystem, in our case, our primary platform will be Snowflake, but we have some others. We are also leveraging Palantir. There are a number of things downstream that I'll be able to materially make better. But we had to make a choice. A lot of companies will make a decision that says, okay, I was on ECC. I'm going to have a defined point in time where that data is good up until that point, and then I'll have an after view of the new data model. We had a requirement to effectively be able to tie the old data to the new seamlessly and applications and analytic capabilities that exist downstream, which is forcing us to go down this path of mapping, again, new data structures on the SAP world into old data structures, just because our data environment is not optimal. I hope I answered that question. We are doing conversions, we are cleansing, but ultimately there's a bigger thing for us, and that's the downstream data. 𝗓𝗏 did not use business objects or BW, which was common for a lot of companies, run data through BW and push it to a data warehouse. They made a choice early on, and it's easy to be Monday morning quarterback. But at that point in time, they thought it was the right decision to replicate data in a like-for-like capability. That allowed them to move it fast, but it did not create the data structures you would want to logically and physically model to create extended capabilities over time. We will come back and fix it, just not as part of this ERP project.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Now you mentioned Palantir and Snowflake as two examples of non-SAP products that you're using.
Yeah.
What, how did you navigate that though? You know, the SAP ecosystem of stuff that kind of hovers around S/4HANA and the other ancillary products. And then you've got non-SAP stuff. How did you guys find the right balance of the SAP products versus the other stuff that you use to augment the rollout?
Well, we had a lot of conversations, a lot of work with our enterprise and solution architects. The hard thing about these data platforms and environments, certainly on the analytics side, is they're very cyclical. There's a new flavor of the month, whether, a few years ago you could have looked at Tableau, the end user capabilities and the analytics. Now we've got a really strong voice from our data science organization. They like to use different tools and what they want to work and how, but ultimately we wanted to align ourselves with, what we thought were the best platforms moving forward so we could create, I think our long-term answer is to create certified data sets and a handful of certified standard reports, but ultimately I want to create the platform that others can come in. We have a user base of largely engineers spread out all through North America. They're not intimidated by technology. In fact, they want to get in and write their own queries and get their own result sets. And so, a partner like Snowflake in that example is a great platform for us to be able to provide capabilities from the centralized IT function, but then also allow those end users. The other thing that we really like about Snowflake is it has already and will continue our ability to share data with some of our key partners. Is extremely high on that Snowflake platform. Rather than having months worth of ETL creation and passing files back and forth and getting things to sync up, you can simply, if you're both Snowflake customers, agree to data shares and you're off and rolling in literally hours as opposed to months. So yes, we were thoughtful about what we're using and why. We will keep our finger on the pulse of what will be the latest and greatest things in it. I'm sure you guys, pay attention to this. SAP is going to continue to try to find ways to get more presence and more vendor lock-in. They're going to want more in DataSphere and other things in that data realm. And we're not intentionally trying to pull more things out, but we're trying to provide the platforms that have the best technical capabilities at a point in time to deliver business value. If 5 years from now, SAP's absolutely killing it in the data and analytics space and bringing in non-SAP data sources to that and being able to do it all, and that's what they want to do, we will pivot to what the right thing is for the company at that point in time. We had a different, well-known data warehouse for the better part of 10 years, but at a point in time going forward, the best answer for Kiewit was a different solution set. And so we weren't so much concerned about it. I'm fortunate to work at a company that understands that sunk cost. The question they asked me was not how much money have we spent to get to this point. It's what's the right answer for Kiewit moving forward. And for us, that was a pivot to Snowflake in that case. So a lot of things come into play with it, but you're going to have to be flexible in the ability to share data across these big platforms. It wouldn't surprise you if, again, I told you we've got ServiceNow, we've got SAP, we've got a lot of big different platforms, and we're trying to find ways to avoid having to move data all over the place all the time. But when I talk to our peer companies and companies in different industries, oil and gas in particular, with much larger and more complicated footprints, we're all talking about the same kind of challenges. There is not one perfect and definitive answer for everyone.
Yeah. Well, it gets back to the ownership, having clarity or intent, purpose and intent of why you're doing what you're doing. And, you bring up vendor lock as something that it sounds like it's in the back of your mind. It's not the primary driver of how you choose technologies or platforms you're going to roll out, but it is maybe a secondary benefit of having multiple technologies is you're not locked into one vendor. So that's maybe it wasn't your main driver, but that can be a benefit or advantage as well.
That's right.
So here's some interesting comments coming in here from the threads we've covered so far. That's a question I'm going to get to in just a moment. Actually, while I'm pulling up these comments here, I want to share with the audience another resource that might help here. We have a guide to S/4HANA. You can find it right here if you scan this QR code. It gives our tips and lessons from having helped many companies through their S/4HANA journeys. So if you want to learn more and read that book for free, you can download it by scanning this QR code here, and I'll drop a link to that in the chat below as well. But getting to the some of the comments here, Dan says he's the one that asked about the data. That was the data question. Dan says, thank you for your candor and great advice for a plan to clean after the brownfield is done. And then Ginger followed up on the comment you had around SIs and how you chose your SI. And Ginger said, my experience is that smaller SIs and independents are not bound to the methodology. They're more bound to the outcomes needed. If pivot adjustment is needed, they do that quickly. Now, I would add to that it's important to have a methodology, though. You don't want to be so flexible that you don't have a tool set or a repeatable process that you can at least start with or draw from. But I think finding that right balance of repeatable methodologies with flexibility to adapt to whatever the client needs, I think that's the big thing there.
That's right.
Here's a real quick question or a really important, interesting question from Sam on LinkedIn. Sam says, how much planning took place before you pulled the trigger? What did that planning process look like for you guys? I know it started back in 2018, but sort of as you got ramped up, what was the planning process?
Yeah, we talked about, briefly 2018 initial evaluation. 2022 was initial stages of a very lightweight RFI, RFP process. We're not heavy in terms of process and just the amount of documentation. You can get analysis paralysis. There's companies that evaluate and look at something like this for over 5 years, and everything just continues to move for that kind of time period. I would tell you in 2022, we got really serious about it. In 23, we started to really get our ducks in a row, talk to the executive team downtown, talk to them why we thought this was the right time. And again, in alignment with what we were doing on this $1 billion acquisition. So if I were to say, had it been a singular focus, it would have been 6 to 9 months worth of planning. But the other thing we did, we signed the deal at the end of Q1 2024 with SAP, but we had all our ducks in a row ready to hit the ground running at that point in time. We also were very intentional about an extended runway to put this in. SAP and these other companies are going to want to do two things. One, sign you to the specific deal, and they're going to want to get you live on it so they can check the check mark in terms of, in our case, you're live on RISE. We were very intentional about what we wanted to do, how we want to do it, and why. And it led to an elongated time frame. I mentioned the data challenges. We probably could have done the pure SAP part of this in 9 to 12 months comfortably. But when you start to add in everything else we were going to have to do to not disrupt the downstream data, we ended up extending our total time frame to ultimately what will be about, let's just call it 2 years in terms of rough numbers. We could have gone faster, but we think this is the right pace. We think it allows for a resource ramp at a manageable level for us. You've got a lot of factors in play. You've got supply and demand from SAP, talent pool perspective, functional and technical resources. You got this end of life deadline that I'm guessing a number of you watching today are looking at and wondering, hey, how's that going to play out? You got a lot of people sitting on the sideline wondering, is SAP going to back off in terms of this end of maintenance deadline? Well, if you're paying attention to what's happening on Wall Street and in their filings, they're not changing their perspective. Short of a new CEO and a new board of directors, this is working for them financially. And what's best for SAP and the SAP shareholders, in all cases, may not be directly aligned with what's best for you as the customer. But for a variety of things, to answer your question, we really started in earnest in 22 and 23. I would tell you need at least 9 to 12 months. But when you start to talk about multiple years of doing nothing but planning, you probably need to take a step back and go, wait a minute, something's off. It shouldn't take that much effort.
Yeah, you may have bigger issues if you can't get out of the planning phase. And you're right about analysis paralysis. I mean, you get a point of diminishing returns. You want to do planning, you want to have a clear blueprint, you want to have governance, you want to have a data strategy, change strategy, all that stuff laid out up front. But you can spend years on that planning process, and those are years you could be spending actually moving forward with the transformation. So it's a balancing act for sure.
The caveat I would have in that is if you were doing a greenfield, if you were really doing true business transformation, then again, you've got a different set of variables. The amount of time you need for workshopping in that is much different than what we were doing is, hey, we're going to show you the things that are different. Is this going to work or not? So it's a fairly restricted subset of change, as opposed to we're going to blow everything up. So just keep that in mind. Your time frame could change if you're doing a greenfield.
Yeah, yeah. Related to that, the planning process and ownership of the project, Jason on LinkedIn asked the question that's a good one. Does Qiwit have a formal enterprise program management office, and where does this conversation fit into that structure and that overall planning that you talked about?
And are we talking in reference to like a PMO versus an enterprise PMO?
Well, you're saying PMO or ePMO. How do you guys maybe talk about how you structure the two if you've got both?
We only have a project management office, and it resides within the technology group. I am familiar with, in some other examples in my career of where the PMO might originate in the technology group, and all of a sudden the business areas really like the way the predictable outcomes that provides, or it becomes an enterprise PMO. We do a project management office for our technology solutions contained within the PMO. But if you do know anything about Qiwit and the engineering, but more so the construction side, we build multi-billion-dollar things, whether it's infrastructure and highways, bridges, oil platforms. The way those projects are managed is different on different tool sets than what we do in the core IT.
Got it.
area.
What about in one other thing I want to make sure we don't forget, or that I don't forget, because I did forget until you mentioned it. You talked in passing about RISE. Can you talk a little bit more about SAP's RISE and what role that's played in your implementation, and what's the value been for you guys so far?
Well, on the value side, I would tell you it's too early to know for sure. For a new SAP customer, if you were just coming to them, out of the blue, and you've been on something else without significant hyperscaler experience, RISE makes a tremendous amount of sense. The bet for us with RISE is around long term. Will they keep their commitments and create future innovations on RISE only as they've promised or threatened, depending on your perspective? They are clearly pushing RISE for a variety of reasons, and again, not the least of which is the shareholder value. We took a hard look at RISE and non-RISE. Our ECC environment was on-prem. We've got a tremendous amount of hyperscaler experience. But again, it's about what we believe they are going to deliver over the long term. That was a lot of why I went to RISE. Do we see that value yet? No. They also will talk about, and it makes sense from a PaaS perspective, taking non-value-added infrastructure activities off your plate as a customer. That's real, but it's not compelling for Qiwit. In our case, we've got a very robust infrastructure team with extensive Azure chops. We ended up choosing Azure as our RISE hyperscaler. You'll get to pick your own as you move forward, but that wasn't a major selling point for us. I tell you, we're not paying for Azure or PaaS experience. Getting off the ground in full transparency has actually been a little harder on RISE had we been doing it ourselves. With RISE, you've got SAP's infrastructure provisioning timelines, you've got marked up SKUs, you've got limited SKUs in what we have as a private cloud agreement with them. And so for customer off the street, you don't have a big IT staff that has experience with a hyperscaler, RISE makes a hell of a lot of sense. In our case, it was a harder conversation because we have tremendous infrastructure talent. We've got a tremendous amount of Azure experience. We would know the SKUs we want, but they're not on the menu for RISE. They're not certified SKUs. So working through that collaboratively with SAP has been, honestly, a challenge. I think they would say it's been a challenge. We've got a rhythm where we're going to end up with a great environment, but ultimately, you got to understand what you're getting and what you're giving in that RISE agreement. But the value proposition for us will be determined in the long term. Talk to me 3 or 4 years after go live. I can tell you, was it the right pick or not? But for right now, and even at the point in time, we felt like it was the right choice. And to SAP's credit, and we had to push for this, they gave us pricing for RISE and non-RISE. They gave us quotes for on-prem. Initially, they were clearly trying to incentivize you to move to RISE, but at the end of the day, they gave us good faith quotes on both sides, and we made the decision in full transparency to go RISE, even when we had a case could be made defendably to go our own hyperscaler or even run this thing on-prem. We had all the choices, and we still chose RISE.
Yeah, interesting. Well, last question for you. I would ask your advice to CIOs or project teams that are about to begin. And if you want our advice, download this guide to S/4HANA, scan this QR code, you get it for free. You can read it. It goes through all of our tips for how to get started, how to manage your transformation with SAP, and just how to prepare for it. But what if I'm a new CIO and I'm thinking about moving forward with S/4HANA or any ERP project for that matter? What advice? What's the biggest piece of advice you could give? So maybe that one thing you wish someone would have told you, or maybe you didn't know. What would you say?
If I had to circle back to one, it's going to sound overly simplistic, but it's the right people. Who do you have working with you? Who do you have helping you? Who do you have calling you out when you're making questionable or wrong decisions? Who's going to challenge you, but help get you on the right track? It's one of the things that we felt very good about the engagement with Third Stage. We've got people embedded that are always looking for, and I'm always questioning, what are we missing? What do we not have right? But ultimately, A, talent will always win, whether it's in your contract negotiation or your SI partners. If you don't have an A team, it's going to make it extremely difficult to be successful in something like this. And so I think, as simple as that sounds, it does come back all the way to the people.
It's easy to forget, in this world of RISE and cloud and AI, all the cool technology stuff. A lot of times it's something that simple gets lost in the shuffle. So I think
that's right. Get the A team. That's right.
Yeah. Good deal. Well, I know you've got a hard stop, so I'm gonna let you have a few minutes before your next meeting, but thank you so much for joining, Justin. This is super interesting, and highly encourage everyone to connect with you on LinkedIn. If you're watching on LinkedIn, connect with them there. If you're not watching on LinkedIn and you're on there, go check him out. We'll tag him he's tagged in the post in the stream, so be sure to follow him there, and download our guide to SAP if you want more advice on how to make your S/4HANA implementation successful. If you'd like to bounce around ideas related to your project, or you're just getting started, maybe you're having trouble with your S/4HANA implementation, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to be a sounding board as well. So thank you very much for joining, Justin. Thanks to the audience for being here, and hope you all have a great week. And we'll see you next week, same time, same place. We do this every week. Thanks for being part of the live production of Transformation Ground Control here today, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Take care, everyone.